Commander Velkorth had traveled across the galaxy for more than 200 years. And in all that time he had never felt true fear until he found Earthis. His scout vessel was small and fast, built for watching without being seen, and he had used it to study over 1,000 different worlds with intelligent life on them. He had seen creatures made of living crystal, beings that swam through the clouds of gas giants, and empires so vast that they controlled entire star clusters. But none of them had ever made his 4 hearts beat faster with terror, the way these strange hairless apes did. He watched them for 30 rotations of their small blue world, hiding his ship behind their single large moon and using sensors so advanced that he could count the hairs on their bodies from orbit. At first he thought they were just another primitive species, not yet ready for the stars, barely worth noting in his report to the Galactic Council. Then he began to study their history. And everything changed. The humans had a method of hunting that existed nowhere else in the known universe. They did not ambush their prey like sensible predators, and they did not use superior speed or strength to catch their food. Instead, they simply followed their target and never stopped walking. Velkorth watched recordings of ancient humans chasing animals across vast open plains under a burning sun. The animals were faster, much faster, and they would sprint away and leave the humans far behind. But the humans just kept walking, kept following, never stopping to rest. The animals would run again when the humans got close, and again the humans would fall behind, but still they kept coming. Hours passed, and then days, and the humans never stopped. They walked through heat that should have killed them. They tracked their prey across distances that should have been impossible. And eventually, the animal would collapse from exhaustion, its body broken and its spirit crushed. And the humans would finally catch up and kill it with simple weapons. They called this persistence hunting. And it was written into their very bones. Velkorth felt cold when he understood what this meant. These creatures had evolved to be the most patient and relentless hunters in the universe, and that trait had not disappeared when they built cities and invented technology. It had simply found new outlets. He studied their wars and saw the same pattern everywhere. When humans decided to destroy something, they did not stop until it was completely gone. They had hunted entire species of animals to extinction, not because they needed food, but simply because they had decided those animals should not exist anymore. They fought wars that lasted generations, passing their hatred from parent to child like a precious gift, never forgetting and never forgiving one. Of their ancient generals had said something that burned itself into Velkorth's mind. We will fight on the beaches. We will fight on the landing grounds. We will fight in the fields and in the streets. We will fight in the hills. We shall never surrender. This was not a species that could be conquered. This was not a species that could be intimidated. This was a species that would follow you to the end of time itself if you gave them a reason. Velkorth composed his report with shaking hands, checking every word 3 times before sending it through the hyperspace relay to the Galactic Council. He marked it with the highest priority code, the one reserved for existential threats to the galactic order. And he added a personal warning at the end. Do not engage this species under any circumstances, he wrote. They are not the strongest or the fastest or the smartest species I have observed, but they possess a quality that makes them more dangerous than all of those things combined. They do not know how to stop. They do not understand the concept of giving up. If you attack them, if you harm them, if you give them a reason to hate you, they will hunt you forever. I repeat, do not engage. He sent the message and waited, hoping that the wise beings who ruled the galaxy would listen to his warning. The response came 3 days later, and it was not what he had hoped for. High Arbiter Theska, the ancient being of crystalline light who had led the council for 3,000 cycles, had personally reviewed his report and found it lacking. Her message was polite but dismissive, written with the confidence of someone who had never been wrong in her very long life. Commander Velkorth, Your dedication to your duties is commendable, but your conclusions are not supported by evidence, she wrote. The species you describe is primitive, barely capable of leaving their own atmosphere, and poses no threat to the Galactic Council. We have conquered hundreds of worlds with far more advanced civilizations, and this one will be no different. Your recommendation is noted, but rejected. The message continued with news that made Vilkorath's blood run cold. Furthermore, this world has been added to the Harvestable Worlds Registry. Its resources and population will be collected by the Harvest Fleet within 1 standard year. This is a routine operation and requires no further input from the Reconnaissance Division. You are ordered to proceed to your next assignment. Velkorath read the message 5 times, hoping that somehow the words would change. But they stayed the same. He thought about sending another warning, about begging the Council to reconsider, but he knew it would be useless. Theska had made her decision, and the Council always followed her lead. They would send the Harvest Fleet to Earth. They would try to conquer humanity, and they would learn the truth of his warning in the worst possible way for a long moment. Velkorath sat in silence, staring at the blue planet spinning slowly beneath his ship. Somewhere down there, 8 billion humans went about their daily lives, unaware that an ancient and powerful empire had just decided to enslave or destroy them, wondered what they would do when the fleet arrived. Would they surrender like so many species before them, or would they fight? In his hearts, he already knew the answer. Velkorath made a decision then, one that would have gotten him executed if the Council ever found out. He powered down his ship's transponder, erased his flight records, and set a course for the outer rim of the galaxy. As far from Council space as he could possibly get, he wanted no part in what was coming as his ship jumped into hyperspace. Leaving Earth behind forever, Velkorath thought about the humans one last time. He thought about their patience, their stubbornness, their absolute refusal to ever give up. And he knew with terrible certainty that the Galactic Council had just made the worst mistake in its long history. They had given humanity a reason to hunt them, and humanity would never, ever stop. The Harvest Fleet arrived on what humans called a Tuesday afternoon. 12 massive vessels descending through the clouds like dark gods, coming to judge the world below Fleet Admiral. Crixthana stood on the bridge of her flagship and watched the planet grow larger in the viewing screens. She had commanded more than 400 harvesting operations in her career, and every single one had followed the same pattern. The primitive species would see the fleet. They would panic, they would try to communicate, and eventually they would surrender. It was always the same, because facing a force so much greater than yourself left you with no other choice. She expected the humans to follow this pattern. Exactly the first sign that something was different came within. The first hour of their arrival, her communication officers reported that they were receiving thousands of transmissions from the planet below, but none of them were pleas for mercy or offers of surrender. Instead, the humans were talking to each other, coordinating, organizing. They were preparing to fight Admiral Crixthana. Found this amusing at first. She had seen species try to resist before, and it never ended well for them. The technological gap between the Harvest Fleet and a primitive world was simply too large to overcome. It would be like insects trying to fight a storm then. The nuclear weapons started flying 6 hours after the fleet's arrival. 3 different human nations launched their entire stockpile of nuclear missiles at the vessels in orbit. The weapons were primitive, laughably so, using simple atomic reactions that the Council had mastered hundreds of thousands of years ago. The fleet's shields absorbed the explosions without even flickering, but Admiral Crixthana was no longer amused in 400 operations, across dozens of species and hundreds of worlds. No primitive civilization had ever attacked first. They always waited, always tried to negotiate, always hoped that maybe the invaders would go away. The idea of attacking a vastly superior force was simply not something that sensible beings did. Humans, it seemed, were not sensible beings. The Admiral decided that a demonstration of power was needed. She selected a large coastal city at random, a place the humans called Sydney, and ordered a single plasma beam fired at its center. The weapon struck with the fury of a dying star, and in an instant 8 million humans ceased to exist. The city was simply gone, replaced by a crater of molten glass that glowed red against the darkening sky. Surely now the humans would understand their position. Surely now they would surrender. The response came within hours, and it was not surrender. Every remaining military force on the planet attacked at once. Missiles launched from submarines hidden in the deepest oceans. Satellites that had been floating peacefully in orbit suddenly redirected themselves to crash into the fleet's vessels. Aircraft flew directly into the hulls of the harvesting ships with their pilots still inside. The attacks did almost no damage, but they did not stop. Admiral Crixthana watched in growing horror as humans threw themselves at her fleet with absolutely no regard for their own lives. They were not trying to win, she realized. They were trying to hurt her, to make her pay for what she had done. And they did not care if they died in the attempt. One of her officers detected a transmission coming from the ruins of Sydney, where the plasma beam had struck. Somehow, impossibly, a human had survived in the outskirts of the blast zone, and he was broadcasting on all frequencies. The Admiral ordered the transmission displayed on her screen, and she saw a human male standing in the rubble of what had once been a building. His face was burned, his uniform was covered in blood, and one of his arms hung uselessly at his side. Behind him, fires raged and smoke filled the sky, but his eyes were clear, and his voice was steady. "You have made a mistake you cannot undo," the human said, staring directly into the camera as if he could see the Admiral watching him. "We know what you are now. We know what you want, and we will never give it to you. For every one of us you kill, 10 more will rise to take our place. For every city you burn, 1,000 hearts will fill with hatred that will never fade." He paused, coughing blood, but his gaze never wavered. "We will find you. We will find all of you. We will learn your names and the names of your worlds and the names of your children. And we will hunt you across the stars for as long as it takes. 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years. It does not matter. We are humanity, and we do not know how to stop." The transmission ended, and Admiral Crixthana sat in silence for a long moment. She thought about Commander Velkorith's warning, the one the Council had dismissed so easily, and she finally understood what he had been trying to tell them. This was not a species that could be harvested like the others. This was something new, something terrible, something that would not rest until either it was dead or its enemies were. Admiral sent a message to the Galactic Council, requesting immediate reinforcements. She told them about the nuclear attacks, about the suicide runs, about the human who had broadcast his defiance from the ashes of his burning city. She told them that Commander Velkorith had been right, that they should never have come here, that they needed to leave before things got worse. Council's response was swift and terrifying in its simplicity. "Destroy the planet," High Arbiter Theska ordered. "Leave nothing alive. Glass the surface and burn what remains. We will not be threatened by primitives." Admiral Crixthana obeyed, because she had no choice. But as she gave the order to begin the orbital bombardment, she could not shake the feeling that this was exactly what the humans had wanted. They had known they could not win. They had known from the moment the fleet appeared that their world was doomed. But instead of surrendering, they had fought with everything they had, making sure that the Council would never forget them. And as the first bombs began to fall, erasing cities and forests and oceans and everything else that humanity had built over thousands of years, Admiral Crixthana realized something that would haunt her for the rest of her short life. The humans had not been fighting to save their planet. They had been fighting to give themselves a reason to hunt, and now they had one. The Galactic Council believed they had solved the human problem. The orbital bombardment had lasted for 3 days, and when it was finished, nothing remained of Earth but a ball of molten rock spinning silent through space. The oceans had boiled away, the atmosphere had burned off, and every trace of human civilization had been reduced to ash and memory high. Arbiter Theska declared victory and ordered all records of the incident sealed. There was no need to trouble the other Council species with news of a failed harvest, and certainly no need to mention the unsettling behavior of the primitive species that had been eliminated. The matter was closed, the threat was gone, and the galaxy could return to its normal business. But the Council had made a terrible mistake. They had assumed that humans would stay on their planet and die with it, because that was what every other species would have done. They had not considered that humans might plan ahead, might prepare for the worst, might scatter themselves across the stars before the end came in. The 18 months between first contact and the destruction of Earth, humanity had launched everything they had into the void colony ships built in secret, hidden in deep caves and underwater facilities where alien sensors could not reach. Generation ships constructed from hastily welded together space stations and asteroid mining platforms. Stolen alien vessels captured during the desperate fighting, repaired by engineers who had learned more about alien technology in 18 months than most species learned in centuries. Anything and everything that could carry human beings away from their dying world. They fled in every direction, burning hard for the darkest and most distant places they could find. They hid in asteroid belts, buried themselves in the frozen moons of gas giants, established secret bases in the empty spaces between stars where no one would think to look. They scattered like seeds in the wind, and the Council never even noticed. But the humans did not just bring themselves. They brought 3 things that would shape the next 500 years of galactic history. They brought their children, raising them on stories of Earth and teaching them to never forget where they came from. They brought their technology, everything humanity had ever invented or discovered or stolen, from the aliens who had destroyed their world, and they brought a list. The list contained every name humanity had been able to gather during those 18 terrible months. Every species represented on the Galactic Council, every admiral who had commanded a vessel in the Harvest Fleet, every arbiter who had voted for the destruction of Earth, every politician and military leader and bureaucrat who had played any role in the decision. It also contained the location of every homeworld, every colony, every outpost that belonged to those species humanity called their scattered survivors the diaspora, and they called their mission the Long Hunt 10 years past. And the Galactic Council had nearly forgotten that humans had ever existed. The records were sealed, the witnesses were silent, and life continued as it always had. Trade ships moved between worlds, diplomats argued in grand chambers, and the great machine of galactic civilization ground on without interruption. Then, the first colony went dark. It was a tyranny world, a small agricultural settlement on the edge of Council space. One day it was sending regular reports and requesting supplies, and the next day there was only silence. Investigators arrived 3 weeks later and found no survivors, no bodies, no sign of what had happened, except for a message carved into the stone floor of the central plaza. Written in perfect galactic standard. Sydney, the Council was troubled but not alarmed. Colonies failed sometimes, and strange messages could have many explanations. They launched an investigation that went nowhere, and eventually closed the case as an unsolved mystery 20 years past. And the incidents continued. The Vith Kai homeworld lost its second moon. Somehow, impossibly, a device of unknown origin had detonated in the moon's core, shattering it into 1 billion fragments that rained down on the planet below. Millions died, and in the debris field, rescue teams found pieces of a human vessel and another message. We remember every name. A council. Admiral was found dead in her private quarters on one of the most secure stations in the galaxy. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of how the killer had gotten in or out, and no clues except for a small piece of paper tucked into her hand. On it was written the name of a human city that no longer existed. The Harvest Fleet's lead engineer, the one who had designed the weapons that burned Earth, disappeared while traveling between worlds. His ship was found drifting empty in deep space, and the only thing aboard was a recording of a human voice saying, "We told you we would find you." Over and over again, 50 years passed, and 17 council species had experienced what came to be called incidents, assassinations of political leaders, carried out by methods that should have been impossible. Plagues engineered to target specific alien biologies, released on crowded worlds with devastating effect. Economic sabotage that collapsed planetary economies and caused billions to starve. Infrastructure attacks that crippled power grids, transportation networks, and communication systems. The attacks were never direct military confrontations, because humanity knew they could not win those kinds of fights. They were still too few, still too weak, still rebuilding in the shadows. Instead, they fought the only way they knew how, the way their ancestors had hunted on the plains of their lost world, with patience, with precision, with absolute unwavering dedication that never faded, no matter how many years passed High Arbiter Theska, now ancient even by the standards of her long-lived species, convened an emergency session of the Council. She stood before the assembled representatives of 100 worlds and demanded answers. How is this possible? She asked, her crystalline form flickering with anger and fear. We destroyed their world. We burned their civilization to nothing. How are they still fighting us? A junior analyst, trembling with terror, provided the answer that no one wanted to hear. High Arbiter, our models indicate that humans do not fight the way other species fight. They do not seek victory or conquest or even survival in the traditional sense. They fight because they cannot imagine doing anything else. Our projections suggest that they will continue this conflict until either they are completely extinct or we are. The chamber fell silent. There is no negotiation possible. The analyst continued. There is no peace treaty they will accept. There is no price we can pay to make them stop. The only way this ends is with the total annihilation of one side or the other. Theska dismissed the analyst and sat in silence for a long time, thinking about Commander Velkorith's warning from so many years ago, the one she had so arrogantly ignored. Do not engage, he had written. They will hunt you forever. She finally understood what he had meant, and she knew, with cold and terrible certainty, that the hunt was only beginning. By the 2nd century of the Long Hunt, humanity had become something new. The survivors who had fled Earth in stolen ships and hastily built vessels had not spent the years hiding in the dark. They had been busy, very busy, doing what humans had always done best, learning, adapting, growing stronger. They had reverse engineered every piece of alien technology they could capture, steal, or salvage from the wreckage of their attacks. Weapons that had seemed like magic when the Harvest Fleet first arrived were now understood completely, improved upon, and mass-produced in hidden factories, carved into asteroids and buried beneath frozen moons, had bred themselves for survival in the void, using genetic engineering and selective breeding to create new kinds of humans who could resist vacuum, tolerate radiation, and live for centuries. Some had given up biological bodies entirely, uploading their minds into computer networks where they could think faster and remember everything forever. They had built fleets in the darkness, thousands of vessels constructed in secret shipyards scattered across the galaxy. They had trained armies in hidden stations, soldiers who had never known Earth, but who had grown up on stories of its beauty and its destruction. They had raised generations who knew nothing but the mission, Children taught from birth that they existed for one purpose, and one purpose only: revenge. The Galactic Council, meanwhile, had fractured under the pressure of 100 years of invisible wart-whelved species, had withdrawn entirely, fleeing to distant galaxies in the desperate hope that humans would not follow them. Some had made it, disappearing into the void and never being heard from again. Others had been found, their new colonies destroyed by human ships that had tracked them across unimaginable distances with patience that defied all reason. Remaining council members existed in a state of constant terror. No world was truly safe. No leader lived without fear of assassination. No ship traveled without armed escort. Trade routes had collapsed because merchant vessels kept disappearing, their crews killed, and their cargo stolen. Economies that had thrived for millennia were crumbling under the weight of endless paranoia. And then, after 140 years of shadow warfare, humanity decided it was time to stop hiding. The Battle of Thesca's Light was announced 3 days before it happened. Human vessels appeared briefly in dozens of systems, broadcasting a simple message on all frequencies: "We are coming. Gather your fleets at the Arbiter's homeworld. Face us if you dare. This ends now." High Arbiter Thesca, who had grown old and tired and frightened over the long years of the hunt, ordered every available ship to defend her world. She stripped colonies of their protection, recalled patrol vessels from across council space, and assembled the largest fleet in galactic history. 15,000 vessels, representing the combined military might of every remaining council species. Gathered in orbit around her crystalline planet, the humans arrived. With 3,000 ships, Admiral Chun Wei commanded the human fleet from the bridge of a vessel that had been built from the fused wreckage of 100 conquered alien ships. He was old by baseline human standards, his body more machine than flesh, but his mind was sharp, and his hatred burned as hot as ever. He had been born on a refugee ship, raised on stories of Earth, and trained from childhood for this moment. He looked at the enemy fleet on his tactical display, noting the 5-to-1 numerical advantage they held, and he smiled. "All vessels," he broadcast, "you know what we're here to do. You know what they took from us. For Earth, for our ancestors, for every name on the list. Show them what it means to hunt humanity." The battle began, and it was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships did not fight like normal vessels. They did not maintain safe distances, or retreat when damaged, or surrender when defeat seemed certain. They flew directly into the heart of the enemy formation, weapons blazing, ramming their vessels into larger ships when their guns ran dry. When their ships were crippled, the crews ejected in escape pods and continued fighting with personal weapons, firing at passing vessels with rifles that could never pierce their hulls, but firing anyway. Because that was what humans did. Council captains watched in horror as human vessels intentionally detonated their own reactors to take enemy ships with them. They saw human soldiers spacewalk across the void to board enemy vessels and fight hand-to-hand in the corridors. They witnessed acts of suicidal courage that should have been impossible. Crews giving their lives without hesitation if it meant one more enemy destroyed. Admiral Chun Wei's flagship took a direct hit from a Veth-Kai dreadnought, tearing through the hull and killing half his crew. He ordered the survivors to continue firing while he broadcast one final message on all frequencies. "You killed our world," he said, his voice calm even as flames consumed the bridge around him. "Did you think we would ever forgive? Did you think we would ever forget? Did you think we would ever stop?" His ship lasted 3 more minutes before it finally exploded, taking 2 council cruisers with it, but by then, it no longer mattered. The council fleet was in full retreat, what remained of it anyway. Of the 15,000 vessels that had gathered to defend the Arbiter's homeworld, fewer than 2,000 escaped. The rest were destroyed, captured, or crippled beyond repair. Human losses were heavy too. nearly half of their fleet lost. But they had achieved something that had seemed impossible. They had won High Arbiter Theska was captured in her palace, dragged from her throne by human soldiers, who looked at her with eyes that held 500 years of hatred. She tried to speak, tried to offer surrender, tried to beg for mercy, but the humans did not care about her words. She was the last name on the original list. The being who had dismissed Commander Velkorith's warning so many years ago. The one who had ordered the destruction of Earth. They had plans for her, as the crystalline arbiter was led away in chains. The commander of the landing force, a woman whose ancestors had died in the burning of Sydney, stood on the steps of the palace and looked up at the sky. Human vessels now orbited unchallenged above a council homeworld for the first time in history. For Earth, she whispered, and her words were echoed by every human in the fleet. A chorus of voices spanning 3,000 ships. For Earth, the tide had turned, and the hunt was entering its final phase. 500 years had passed since the destruction of Earth, and the galaxy was a very different place. The Galactic Council no longer existed. It had dissolved itself 3 centuries ago, its remaining members hoping that by destroying the institution, they might somehow escape the wrath of the species that had hunted them for so long. They had scattered across the stars, abandoned their capitals, changed their names and their cultures and even their physical forms in desperate attempts to disappear. It had not worked. Humanity had found them, one by one, system by system, name by name. They had tracked down every species that had voted for the harvest, every world that had supported the council, every individual whose name appeared on the list. Some had been destroyed, their civilizations reduced to ash just as Earth had been. Others had been conquered and absorbed, their populations now living under human rule. A few had been shown mercy, allowed to survive as remnant populations who served as living reminders of what happened. To those who threatened humanity, the list was almost complete. Humanity itself had evolved beyond recognition over the 5 centuries of the long hunt. They had spread across 1,000 worlds, adapted themselves to 1,000 different environments, and split into 1,000 different forms. Some had remained biological, their bodies enhanced but still recognizable as the descendants of Earth. Others had become mechanical, their consciousness running on computer networks that spanned entire star systems. A few had transcended physical existence entirely, becoming beings of pure energy that could travel between stars at the speed of thought. But in every form, in every iteration, in every scattered branch of the human family tree, one thing remained constant. They remembered the memorial of Earth, floated in the empty space where the 3rd planet of an unremarkable yellow star had once orbited. It was the size of a small moon, constructed over centuries from the wreckage of conquered fleets, and its surface was covered in names. 8 billion names, one for every human who had died in the initial invasion and the bombardment that followed, carved into metal that would last until the stars themselves burned out humanities. Children came here on pilgrimage from across the galaxy. They traveled from worlds they had settled, civilizations they had built, and societies they had conquered. They spoke 10,000 languages now, worshipped 100 different philosophies, and disagreed about almost everything. But when they stood before the memorial, they all fell silent, and they all remembered today. Something different was happening in the space near the memorial. A gathering was taking place, representatives from across the galaxy assembling for the first time in 3 centuries. The Remnant Assembly, they called themselves, a loose coalition of species that had survived the long hunt and now sought to negotiate peace with the beings who had spent 500 years hunting them. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka represented humanity at this gathering. She was old by baseline standards, but young by the new ones. Her lifespan extended by technology that would have seemed like magic to her ancestors. She stood before the assembled delegates, beings of 100 different species, who looked at her with fear and desperate hope. And she listened to their request. They asked for forgiveness. They asked for the hunt to finally end. They asked for a chance to move forward, to build a new galaxy where humans and aliens could live together in peace. Tanaka was quiet for a long moment. Considering their words, "You ask us to forgive?" she finally said, her voice carrying across the chamber without amplification. "You ask us to forget. You ask us to move forward and pretend that the last 500 years never happened." The delegates leaned forward, hoping for mercy. "We have moved forward," Tanaka continued. "We have built civilizations that will outlast your stars. We have spread further than your ancestors could have imagined. We have become more than you ever feared we could be. In every way that matters, we have won." She paused, and her expression shifted to something harder. "But forget? Forgive? You misunderstand our nature. You always have." The delegates shrank back in their seats. "We are the species that walked across continents to chase our prey. We are the species that climbed out of gravity wells through nothing but stubbornness and spite. We are the species that looked at the death of our homeworld and said, 'This is not enough to stop us.'" She took a step forward, and every being in the chamber flinched. "For 500 years, we hunted you. For 500 years, we remembered every name and every crime and every drop of blood you spilled. For 500 years, we never stopped, never rested, never considered giving up. That is who we are. That is what we have always been. And you want us to simply forget?" Silence filled the chamber. No, the word hung in the air like a death sentence. "But," Tanaka continued, and her voice softened slightly, "we are more than just hunters. We are also builders, dreamers, creators. We have made beautiful things as well as terrible ones. And we are tired." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each delegate in turn. "We will not forgive. We cannot forget. But we are willing to stop. The hunt is over. The list is complete. Every name has been accounted for. Every wrong has been answered. There is nothing left to chase." The delegates began to hope again. "We will trade with you," Tanaka said. "We will work alongside you. We will even protect you, because you are part of our galaxy now, and we protect what is ours. This is the peace we offer. Not forgiveness, not forgetting, but an end to the killing and a chance to build something new together." She straightened, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow filled every corner of the chamber. "But understand this. If any species ever again threatens humanity, if any being ever again tries to do to us what you did 500 years ago, we will remember. We will hunt. And we will never, ever stop." She turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving the assembled species in stunned silence. The Remnant Assembly accepted humanity's terms that same day. There was really no other choice far away, in a hidden station that drifted in the space between galaxies. A human archivist named Marcus Chun sat alone in a small room, staring at a document that had been passed down through his family for 500 years. It was the original list, the one that had been compiled in those desperate months before Earth's destruction. And every single name on it had finally been crossed out. The hunt was over. Marcus should have felt satisfied, should have felt at peace. But instead, he felt something else. A quiet certainty that this was not really the end. Opened a new file on his computer and began to type. The document was labeled simply, "The Watch." Humanity had learned many things during their long hunt across the stars. They had learned that the galaxy was vast and dangerous, filled with species who might one day make the same mistake the Council had. They had learned that power corrupts, and that absolute power corrupts absolutely. They had learned that evil never really dies. It just waits for another chance to rise, and so humanity would watch. They would wait. They would prepare. And if any species ever again threatened the children of Earth, they would remember the lessons of the long hunt. Marcus finished his work and looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, billions of humans were building new lives, new civilizations, new futures. They had earned their peace through 5 centuries of blood and fire and patient, relentless hunting, but they had not forgotten how to hunt, and they never would in the void between galaxies. Where no other species had ever ventured, humanity kept its vigil, watching, waiting, remembering forever.